Hi everyone. This time we are crowded, I think. So, Zen from Circle CI, he will talk about advanced CI/CD patterns. Enjoy.
Hello, Labas. My name is Zan, and thanks for having me here. Um, so yeah, today I'll be talking about CI/CD patterns and travel, because these things, if as I hope you will get to understand, do have a few things in common. For example, we all have scary stories with deployment, and some of us have scary stories about travel. This is my one. It's from 2020, and funny enough, it has nothing to do with the pandemic. The month is January 2020, and I was going on a trip from London, where I live, to Boston, and for reasons, I decided not to take one of the 12 daily flights between the cities that would go direct, but instead I decided to fly via Reykjavik in Iceland. And I land in early afternoon. My flight was 3 hours later, so like a short-ish layover, comfortable, nice. Had some food, had some wine. Life was good. Snow was falling, and then my flight gets delayed. Half hour, then 1 hour, then a few hours, and everyone else's flights were delayed as well. Looking through the window, snow was falling. There was a lot of snow falling. For January in Iceland, some might some might think it's expected. Anyway, this was a bit more than expected, and we all ended up having our flights cancelled. And this is like pretty busy airport. They're pretty busy hub for transatlantic travel, and there were thousands of people stranded in the airport when all the flights were closed because there was so much snow that Icelanders couldn't cope with it. Bad, right? Anyway, looking at my options, I'm like, okay, let's find a hotel in Reykjavik. There were no hotels in Reykjavik, which has, I think, about the quarter of population of Vilnius. So it's a small city, right? There was no hotels, and even if there were, the road between Keflavik, where the airport is, on the peninsula, and the capital city was snowed in. So yeah, we were stranded. So me and a few thousand other people had to spend the night in a makeshift shelter in a sports hall in organized by basically Icelandic Red Cross chapter, which was fun. Never done it before, but this photo is from before we were boarding that bus to take us there. I'm getting to CICD, I promise. Anyway, this was the worst travel disruption to Icelandic air travel since the 2010, so 10 years prior volcano eruption with an unpronounceable name. That one. Yeah, so how this all unfolded. I was able to get to my destination within 24 hours after spending the night in there. They fed us, they sheltered us, and pretty much everyone else had a similar experience. Um, but yeah, when I'm not stranded in the middle of Atlantic, I work as a developer advocate at Circle CI, talking to developers, DevOps engineers, platform engineers, infra engineers about CI/CD, their setups, their organizations, what kind of challenges they are solving. Circle CI, we're probably the biggest company dedicated to CI/CD. We have on-prem, cloud, hybrid options for compute, and basically work with companies all over the globe, working in pretty much every industry for every use case. And one of my hobbies is, or one of my focuses is, and interests is to basically learn about advanced use cases, advanced patterns that people are solving, and what they're doing to solve them, and how. And this talk is essentially about that. I also do quite a lot of travel because I go to conferences, I go to meetups, I do workshops, talks, etc. I also like to travel for leisure, and whenever I go somewhere, I used to like guidebooks, um, but they're not so good anymore because there is a problem with travel guides, and they're essentially the the DevOps equivalent is essentially a how to tutorial for a hello world pipeline in a given language. Instead of a city, you have Python, you have Ruby, you have Circle CI, you have some other tools. Um, and yeah, sure, anyone can read it, but how valuable it is to anyone, it's a bit more of an issue. And the same with travel guides, right? They'll tell you um, what the top sites are. So that hill with the castle you have in Vilnius, the three crosses, where the main shopping district is, what kind of foods you have to try, and that doesn't really cater to anyone's particular interest because it has to cover the broadest possible audience. And yeah, so that's what travel guides have in common with our kind of entry level tutorials, blogs, etc. But the problems we all have to face, we all are working with, are much more advanced. And travel has one more thing in common with CI/CD. Whatever we're traveling, wherever we're traveling, whenever, we have to do the same things all over again. So we need our boarding pass if we're flying somewhere. We need our documents. I need my computer. I need my 17 adapters, um, and I'm not leaving home without them. You need to go through the airport. You need to go through all the dance with getting all the equipment out, emptying your water bottles, all that nonsense. Get to your destination, find your way to the hotel, etc., etc., etc. It's very much repeatable. And if you're traveling for business, that's basically half of your travel anyway. The other half is in a conference room like this one, which is great. But again, not very useful if all you have to go on with is a guidebook, because you just don't get to partake in any of that. But what we do is we automate things to make these things easy. And obviously, CI/CD in a software context is what allows us to automate and optimize things. So instead of building something manually, you do it in a scripted manner. You do it whenever you push some changes to your GitHub, GitLab repository. And the same with your teammates, the same with your other teams. Let's say you're just one of the teams working on inside the organization. There might be 10, 20, 30 teams. You're all doing the same things. So what we kind of get to see is we see teams specialized in CI/CD, in DevOps, in platform engineering, infrastructure, whatever you name it. They specialize in making making the most out of these kind of CI/CD platforms, patterns, and practices, so that whenever you spin a new project, spin a new team, you have everything ready in a modular fashion for you to just get building, because everyone just wants to get building. Speaking of modular, I'm leaning on a very famous kiosk. I'm from Slovenia originally, which was part of Yugoslavia, and this was designed in 1968 by a Slovenian industrial designer. This is a modular kiosk. They were super popular. When I was a kid, I bought comic books and snacks in there. They were used for like ticket vending stalls and etc. They were everywhere. And this one is quite famous because it actually got its way into a Museum of Modern Art in New York as a example of modular, reusable piece of infrastructure, if you will. I mean, I digress. The other thing that we're kind of that the other thing that we're trying to develop and establish when we are kind of building and thinking about CI/CD systems as a whole organization for a whole organization are also ways and practices to dealing with outages and incidents. and that's common to everyone, because everyone will have incidents. If you've had it, you know how it is. If you haven't had it, I'm sure there will be some time. Unfortunately, we can't escape them. It's a way of life. But what we can control is how we are handling it, what processes we have in place to dealing with them. And going back to my travel horror story, um, they dealt with it. The whole airport was shut down for half a day, basically. And there were thousands of people who were stranded, and pretty much everyone got on their way within the next day and got to their destination about 24 hours later than planned, which is remarkable. Think about that system. How many people needed to go where, get routed to their destinations? And in software, usually you don't have 24 hours to fix something. We actually do a report every year called State of Software Delivery, looking at usage of our pipeline usage across the board, and we kind of came with this um, mean time to recovery metric, and the benchmark we're kind of striving for is like 60 minutes. Your main branch fails, you want to get this fixed in 60 minutes. And yeah, but anyway, today we'll be looking at some patterns and practices that some top DevOps infra teams follow in order to get the most out of CI/CD. I work for CircleCI, so I'll be showing you examples of code in CircleCI, but these are general practices and patterns. You can apply them to any other CI/CD tool. So yeah, my first pattern, or just idea, is to get off the main roads. So again, travel analogy. You're traveling somewhere, you come to a new city. There is usually this main shopping area, main tourist area, main destination. In London, we have Leicester Square, we have Oxford Street. In Spain, in Barcelona, you have La Rambla. Every city has one, especially the bigger, the more touristy they are, the more prominent these places are, and they have absolutely no locals who visit them. Because it's all geared towards tourists. They're all chains. They're all kind of hotels, and there's like nothing in there that would actually be applicable to your main resident population of a city. So basically, all the locals go to side streets, to different districts, to different parts of town where they actually live, where they work, to socialize, to get on with their business. And your main roads are essentially the equivalent. Your equivalent of main roads is essentially the dashboards, the UI that you're using. So, for example, sure, you can do pretty much everything in a UI for a DevOps tool, or you can orchestrate things through an API, which opens up so many new possibilities. And that's my first pattern, because everything else just builds on that. And if you take anything out of this presentation today, is if you have a CI/CD tool, you want to build something advanced, something that doesn't quite do at the moment. Check out the APIs. Maybe there's something you could be orchestrating yourself to get more out of the platform. Because yes, dashboards are inherently limited. They are catering to everyone, and they are obviously not designed for specific use cases. And what APIs allow us, especially in CI/CD context, so you have your regular pipeline, which is commit, push, and then obviously build, test, deploy. That's your kind of regular CI/CD flow. Maybe we want to do something else. Maybe we want to test only a specific variant of the thing. Maybe we want to deploy a specific variant of the thing. Maybe we want to get some artifacts out. And that's what you can do. In CircleCI's case, we can essentially trigger pipelines with parameters. And for example, if I have it here, right? So you can trigger pipelines with, for example, any given parameters. You can trigger them for a specific branch. Obviously, that's what you get from a CI/CD flow anyway, from your commit-based, VCS-based flow. But you can also do more advanced things. So if you have, for example, monorepo, you can you can trigger a build for a specific part of that monorepo, whether that's like a web front end as opposed to building the API, building the server, building whatever. So that's one example. I One of my the folks that I've spoken to, they are big kind of chat ops users, and basically they're a mobile games development shop, and what they do is they have multiple variants of their games for different audiences, for different stores, for different environments, and they want to test against them. And if a QA engineer wants the latest build for a particular application, or a particular game, for a particular app store, so let's say it's going to Google Play, it's going to Huawei's App Store, they can just write a single command in chat, and they have a Slack bot, they use Slack, and it will either run that pipeline, get them the build, and they can install it and use it, or if it's already been done, they basically just reuse whatever assets they've already created, the binary, and reuse it. So that's a really nice example of using the API to essentially use the platform less, spend less, and be faster with what you're doing and more deliberate. So yeah. So when we're in a city, there are multiple ways of getting around, right? You can obviously drive, you can walk, you can, or you can take whatever public transport options there are. And especially with driving, roads can get congested sometimes. The bigger the city, the more congested it usually is, and the longer it takes to get anywhere. The less predictable it is, because you'll be spending your time in traffic versus somewhere else. Public transit usually is oriented so that it flows more smoothly, more naturally, and the bigger the city, the more the people, the easier it is usually to get around through public transit. For example, you have that €1 bus that takes you to the center here. It's amazing. The analogy in DevOps world would be provision your infrastructure centrally, as opposed to having every single team build their own infrastructure, maintain their own infrastructure. First off, on one end, you could basically be running every team could be building their own infra. For example, they need to get the expertise required to, for example, understand Terraform, understand their cloud provider, know what kind of resources they have. On the other hand, obviously, we can do completely centralized. They just send a design doc to their infrastructure team, and the infrastructure team gets back to them in 3 weeks with some resemblance of what they need and the right access. Or they could find some kind of compromise solution that allows the development team to move fast while still benefiting from security, better oversight, and the expertise of a centrally managed kind of infrastructure platform. So that's usually the whole jam of platform teams and platform engineering teams. In my case, I built this central repo for infrastructure, and especially role provisioning in AWS. For example, if you have product teams, for example, working on individual products that are using the same infrastructure, so your AWS, you want them to only have access to the infrastructure that they actually need for the application to provision whatever they need. And so we could have a central repo that they just make pull requests on, and once they make a pull request, that basically gets reviewed and it gets evaluated. For example, in my example, I have this quite simple CI/CD pipeline. Again, this is a Circle CI YAML, where I have 3 jobs essentially: plan infrastructure, which will run Docker Terraform plan. So if you're familiar with Terraform, it's infrastructure provisioning tool by HashiCorp, and provision infrastructure with a manual kind of approval step in between. And essentially how this works is in this repository that I have here, in this repository, the main branch is restricted, so only members of that particular platform teams can merge into it and review into it. And so everyone else needs to open a PR. So once a PR is opened, someone from the platform team can see, okay, they want these resources. They want these access levels, this level of access to their resources. And the way they do it, essentially just write their own policies in AWS manually in there. And in that case, the product team can just need this knowledge, basic knowledge of using what kind of resources they have, and they can still get suggestions, they can still get code reviewed by someone who's like an expert in this. And they just need to create a new project, a new module. One thing that's quite crucial here is naming convention, obviously. If you have a lot of teams, a lot of projects going on, you want to kind of come up with a pretty strict and rigid naming convention so that you're able to decide or quickly identify who owns what something does. So for example, my project is named either role provisioning or demo ECR, and demo ECR is my project name, my team's name, which is basically provisions a single ECR repository and pushes to it basically. And they just need that repository created, and they will be able to then get that reviewed. So centralized infrastructure provisioning through some kind of review process. And yeah, you can do that with GitHub and a pipeline and a couple of projects. It's pretty straightforward. And yeah, so trips, travel, they start and they sometimes end, or they usually end sometime. What I mean by that is that you're not expected to stay somewhere that you travel. You're usually expected to come home and stop paying for hotels. So why should you be paying for environments that you use and create? For example, back in the established olden days, if you will, we had these environments for production, staging to pre-prod, test, you name it. The more enterprise you are, the more of them are usually going to be. And whenever you're trying to build and release something, you go through these environments one after the other. So there's more tests, there's more clashes with other things that want to be pushed. So that's obviously causes a ton of issues, slows you down. So why not create ephemeral, short-lived environments instead? If you've used Heroku, they've had this feature for a long time now. Basically, they allowed you to spin up a whole infrastructure based on a single pull request. So you had your project, you open the pull request, Heroku will spin up the same thing, especially if it's a web application. It's really cool because you can see those changes immediately in that application that's been spun up. And we could do the same for any infrastructure, provided you use something like infrastructure as code. Again, CloudFormation, Terraform, Pulumi, whatever you're using. You can use the same scripts that you have for provisioning your infrastructure anyway to provision more environments. And you could go with like a daily developer environment. So if you use Gitpod, if you use Codespaces, for example, you're already familiar with that idea. You're only using it when you need it. And you could create a cluster, for example, when your day begins, and tear it down automatically when that day ends. You're not polluting anyone else's environments, and it's as effective as you want it to be. You could also do like a PR environment. So for example, if you have a front-end thing, obviously Heroku example, and that could actually work really nicely with like a pull request events. For example, if you have GitHub Actions, you can have like an event that intercepts a pull request in GitHub Actions. Pull request is open. Okay, let's provision an environment. We can have CircleCI do that. And then when the pull request has been closed, you can decommission that environment. So you only have something alive and up for the duration of that pull request, so that you can do your test, you can do your review more effectively without kind of spamming different environments. Or you could do it in a single pipeline run. For example, I have my example here. And this is a CircleCI dashboard. Zoom in slightly. So we're looking at a single kind of pipeline, which has a single workflow, which in this side you have create cluster, deploy to Kubernetes. So I'm creating and deploying. This is using DigitalOcean for a cloud provider, and it's basically creating and deploying its own cluster and then tearing it down at the end of the story. So as I kind of done my testing verification, I can then destroy it manually. This is using a manual approval step, but it's just here to illustrate. But like creating a cluster takes 5 minutes. It can take that little time, or whatever infrastructure you need, depending on what kind of provider you have. You could get away with provisioning something for the duration. You could even, if your infra creation takes longer, maybe you could split it out in a nightly kind of scheduled pipeline run. So if you have a nightly or twice a daily or 4 times a daily pipeline, you could have 1 hour of infrastructure provisioning dance, but that's still not as much of a waste as having 4 extra environments running 24/7. So depends on what you need. They might be cleaner for that. So Victor from DevOps Toolkit had a video on these actually when I was just building my my samples. So that's a recommended watch. So yeah, when you're obviously traveling somewhere, you're in a new city, you are where you are, right? You may be in the center, you may be in this conference area. It's worthwhile exploring somewhere else beyond your immediate neighborhood. That could be a whole new city, could be a whole new district. It doesn't really matter, but there is fun things all around that we could explore. And the same we could say with our pipelines. So your projects probably don't exist in isolation. You probably have things that are dependent on your projects. For example, if you're building a library, you might have consumers of that library who are dependent on your new releases and your software to work correctly, your API to work correctly. So you might want to think about integrating these things between your pipeline and other pipelines to, for example, trigger external tests to give you immediate feedback or as short feedback as possible that what you're building is correct. We've done the provisioning thing, so we've provisioned some infrastructure elsewhere. We've talked about verification, and this, for example, is a great example of an API call. All you need to do is make an API call to trigger another pipeline from your pipeline. And I have my application here, so this is my run external tests pipeline, which basically just spins out a new pipeline, which we should see here. Yeah, so it's one of these ones. So consumer tests. It doesn't do anything, but it has a flow to trigger with the APIs. And in this one, essentially, it's just a curl command, right? So I showed you the trigger API that we use, and takes an API key and then whatever parameters. So for example, let's say we've built a Docker image deployed it somewhere. We want to run tests against it somewhere else. So pass this as a parameter, and then you can consume it. So let me quickly show you this as well. So in my application, yeah, we're basically passing these in depending on what the project is. So org name and project name. And then my consumer essentially has pipeline parameters defined. If there is just a regular CI/CD commit push flow, this will not be set. But if it is set, so if we do have a new image, then we can do something with it, and you basically control that through your workflow. And again, this is a pattern possible across multiple providers, multiple tools. I'm just showing you use cases for how to do something in this particular one. So again, ideas that you could take and implement yourself. Coming back full circle, pun intended, is the circle back pattern that I coined, where you maybe want to get results back from an external test. So you want essentially the external tests reporting back the results to an asynchronously running pipeline. And for that, I was able to use an approval job in Circle CI to basically call the API again, approve that particular job from the initiating job, initiated job. There's a whole write-up. The sample is a bit more convoluted, but essentially you can have a pipeline waiting suspended essentially without kind of polling the API, without consuming kind of constantly the resources that you need for running a pipeline, and there is no like limits regarding build times, build durations, etc. So yeah, again, one of the things you can do with an API if you just kind of orchestrate this cleverly. And yeah, that's kind of all I've got with regards to my samples. So we've kind of explored what kind of ideas you could have to go beyond the usual commit, push, build, test, deploy flow that you see in CI/CD. It usually involves using the API, building your own integrations and orchestrations on top of it to kind of work with your tools, works with your environments, and most importantly, works with your teams. This is all kind of this emerging platform engineering discipline, which kind of centralizes the idea is to centralize the expertise and excellence to a single platform organization that builds tooling for everyone else in the engineering organization so that you can do more with less. And the final thought is, that's a flying car. I just thought it was cool. You can see it in Seattle. And with that, I will just take any questions. And if you have any feedback, if you want some Circle CI swag, I can send you t-shirts. If you want to see the slides, scan this QR code or just go to circleci.com/Zan and I can get back to you.
Any questions?
There are some. Sure.
Thanks for the talk. So with every centralized solution, there's always a drawback of people who are building the solution know best. And most probably, it's the most common pattern which I've seen, that it starts great and you cater for small, as you mentioned, with the guides. So they cater for the everyone and nobody at the same time. So as the central solution grows, it sort of becomes very controlling in what I can do. And if I need something, just a small feature which is not there, I'm basically stuck with using whatever is mandatory. Any suggestions on how teams can overcome that?
Yeah, so absolutely. The key is in finding a balance that's how modular can you go and how prescribed you want to be as an organization. And that's specific to every single organization, right? Sometimes you have a single cloud provider, you have a single pipeline provider, you have a single security scanning tool. And if you have these things, it might be a bit easier. Sometimes you have to use multiple because you are catering to external customers that operate across different clouds, organizations, technologies. So it all very much depends, and it's not it's not something that will fit for everyone. But if you have this kind of centralized platform infra CI/CD organization and mentality and mindset, I mean, this is DevOps anyway, um, you can come up with solutions by just thinking deliberately about them, right, on the for this particular topic.
Okay, thanks.
Maybe finish the in-person question first, and maybe we can check. We have still time. Any other questions?
I've got a hat on, it's really hard to see.
I don't think so.
Yeah, we can read through them. Yeah.
Yeah.
Shall I just read through them? Yeah.
Yeah, you have microphone.
Okay. Yeah. Circle CI versus Jenkins. What are the advantages? Oh, I'm gonna start with a good one. Okay. PS, try that €1 bus at 5 p.m. I dare you. That's why you have scooters. No, Circle CI versus Jenkins. They're two different tools that do some of similar things. One is open source, one is not. One takes more to operate and run, and the other allows you to build more with the resources, with the people that would otherwise be fully focused on maintaining the other. Figure out which one is which. What do you think will replace YAML pipelines in the future? YAML is perfect, isn't it? Yelling at my laptop. I don't know. Like we've not seen something that would effectively be replacing them. We have experimented with an SDK. We actually have an SDK for JavaScript that allows you to essentially script your pipeline, and that might be another kind of way of thinking where you might want to go. But yeah, like I think YAML, for all its flaws and weaknesses, is here to stay for a foreseeable future, especially for pipeline definitions. Any tips on how in the best way to enforce naming conventions with sticks? No, basically you define them in your kind of flow for creating projects, creating like your review flow as well, right? So if you want something, you shouldn't pass a pull request if you're not following the naming convention. So if you have something like that, you can do it, and it just takes everyone to get on board, right? And sometimes it will take longer than other times, but I've also seen people build tooling, like a simple web application, where they basically click through what they need, give their team name, project name, and that will then give you naming convention for what infrastructure to name, how to name your infrastructure, how to name your project, etc. So that's again, like, you need to build it, but once you have it, you can do stuff around it. Now I can barely see this. How do you handle ephemeral review environments? when you need an up-to-date database or integration with other services. Up-to-date database, you can do snapshots. If you have that integration with other services, again, like you snapshot the current state of the state of the environment and try to replicate that. It doesn't work for everything. It doesn't work for everyone, but you need to kind of figure out way to work with it if it makes sense for you. Sometimes if you have a purely microservices architecture, you have 1,000 other services. Maybe that's not the right way to right way to approach things. Maybe you want to do some kind of testing in production, and that's fine as well. Any tips to how to improve PR review process? The team would review it quicker and merge would happen sooner rather than later. Again, what's holding back the reviewers? Is it knowing that a PR has come in? Is it just the fact that they're not focusing on it when they should? So if it's just informing them, you can create a Slack integration, for example. You use Slack, you use Teams, you can send them a message. Hey, your PR is waiting for you. Review it, check it out, please. The other one is more organizational. Again, you want to let everyone know that this is a priority. You're blocking someone, so someone should get onto it. And again, that's an organizational thing. Do you agree with the idea of moving a lot of logic to CI/CD pipelines from conventional methods like database jobs? I work for a CI/CD vendor. What do you think? If it makes sense to you, yes. If you want to do like cron jobs on a database, you can do it. You can do where did that one go now? It's just disabled. It just disappeared. Okay. So yeah, like if it makes sense for you, most of these things are like try them and see how they work, because every organization is very different. What to do when the build and review process becomes the bottleneck in a PR-based workflow for a platform team in large organizations? Great question again. I would say figure out why it's a bottleneck. Figure out why it's a bottleneck and maybe try to add more automation on top of it to make it faster to parse. Maybe you want to get more insights to people so that yeah, it's a lot faster to read through, like security reports, things like that. So more tooling might be solution. Maybe you can avoid the PR-based workflow if that could work for you. Anyway, depends. Unfortunately, I'm here for the next 2 days anyway, so happy to chat about this for a long time anyway. And we have a panel at 2, right? So I'll be on that one as well about infra code. So if you want to join that.
Okay, thank you, Zen, for a great talk, and
thank you.
Yeah.